Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at our webinar to discuss our recent report, Capacity Ceilings in EU Fisheries, Barrier or Opportunity for Decarbonization. I'm Adam Weiss, the Director of Programs for Europe at ClientEarth. The subject of our report is a critical topic as the EU works towards climate neutrality by 2050. The EU is calling on all sectors, including fisheries, to phase out fossil fuels. For fisheries, this transition is about more than just reducing emissions. It's about building a resilient and competitive future for a sector heavily dependent on foreign fossil fuels. The European Commission has committed to a strategic energy transition roadmap for fisheries, supported by DG Mare's ongoing energy transition partnerships. This webinar focuses on a key issue: the role of capacity ceilings in this transition. Originally designed to prevent overfishing, limits on gross tonnage and engine power are being questioned. Do they hinder the adoption of alternative fuels? Or can they drive sustainable practices aligned with the common fisheries policy and the EU's climate goals? Today, we'll hear diverse perspectives from experts and stakeholders as we work together to shape a feasible, ambitious path for the sector's decarbonization. Your participation is vital as we work together to chart a feasible and ambitious path for this sector. Before we begin, I'd like to inform you that interpretation is available in French and Spanish throughout the webinar. Closed captions in English are also available. I especially invite you to use the Q&A box to ask any questions during the interventions, instead of using the chat box. It's the Q&A box that I'll be looking at when we get to the end of the session in order to discuss our questions. We've got an excellent lineup of 4 speakers today. The first 2 are people who bring a more technical background, and the last 2 speakers come from industry. So it's a really nice balance to hear a bit of what's going on technically first, and then to see how it affects the people who are actually engaged in fishing. The last 10 minutes, as I said, will be devoted to Q&A. I encourage everyone to participate actively by asking questions during this dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Again, please use that Q&A function in order to pose your questions. So thank you so much for joining us, and let's dive into this important conversation. I'm very happy to welcome our first speaker, Sarah Hornborg, from the Swedish RISE Institute, who will present findings from the report we commissioned, laying the foundation for our discussions. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adam. Share my screen. All right, do you see my slides? Thank you very much for inviting me to present the main take-home messages from this report, the capacity ceilings in EU fisheries, obstacle opportunity for the decarbonisation process. And this was done by both me and my colleague, Fredrik Ziegler. And just as a quick background that Adam has already mentioned here, that the basic idea of the capacity ceilings, which is the motivation behind this assignment, is that they are often mentioned as a hindrance to the energy transition of EU fisheries. And they, as said, they define a cap on gross tonnage and kilowatts that may not be exceeded at national level. And then there are annual evaluations of different fleet segments using different technological, biological, and economic metrics. And based on these, action plans should be developed for certain fleets and enforced to remove any remaining overcapacity and overfishing at fleet level. Well, if these then are a hinder for the energy transition, this is based on that all the alternative energy sources compared to diesel, they require larger storage volume because they have less energy density. So is there a conflict then between these caps and the energy transition? So we set out to first examine these caps and how member states perform against them at national level after 10 years. And then we looked at a set of case study fisheries motivated by a previous report by ClientEarth and these were the Spanish demersal trawler fleet, French Persenes in distant waters, Italian small-scale vessels, Dutch pelagic fleet, and Portuguese longliners, and looked at some tangible scenarios for how a stepwise decarbonization process could look like for these fisheries, and if they conflict the capacity ceilings. Firstly, when looking at the member state level, we found that the gross tonnage and kilowatt had decreased a lot since 2014, with the green shade here showing a current gross tonnage and kilowatt of 50% lower than the caps, and yellow 25% lower. But it's important to note that certain fleets are still imbalanced in the different member states. And just a quick glance at these, it indicated that a trend that fleets with larger vessels are more imbalanced technologically, that is in the format that they utilize the vessel more during a year, but they're also to a higher extent dependent on overfished stocks. And for our case study fleets, all indicated biological imbalance. Then we looked at the scenarios, where the first scenario was achieving up to 30% reduction in fuel consumption, because it's very important to note that the decarbonization process is really also about energy efficiencies, and this is a very important first step. And these can be made at different costs, from no cost to quite substantial ones, without affecting gross tonnage or kilowatts. It could be change in behavior, such as change speed, the fishing technology used, change in maintenance to improve fuel use, and also large vessel investments. Key actions here are really energy audits and crew training, because we need to know the operational profile, the energy requirements, and so on for the vessels. And they can be installed at, say, 4,500 euros per vessel. So that's an important first step for understanding the profile. And then also different fishery management actions, which are vital to acknowledge, because there are in the common fisheries policy and that promote energy efficient fishing gears, halt overfishing, remove any remaining overcapacity, are also key to enable catch efficiencies and also in the end fuel use efficiencies. And that is also then aligned with the intention behind the capacity ceilings. For scenario 2, we looked at some hybrid solutions that could achieve up to 50% reduction of emissions, where we looked at some potential change in energy carriers, such as combined diesel and batteries, and so on, with no change. Still, the energy audits are still essential here. And just some fleet-specific recommendations on this side would just be to include batteries, to use them as peak shaving during diesel use to optimize the engine running. You can use drop-in biofuels, which could achieve up to 80% reduction, and different technologies here. But it's very important to highlight that these scenario 1 and 2, the energy efficiencies and the hybrid solutions, they're really an additive process. And the emission cuts in the end depends on the starting point where you are today in terms of energy efficiency. And the absolute greenhouse gas reduction potential also depends on the technology, of course. It also, this scale also differs depending on if you look at fleet or vessel basis, because as you see here, the demersal trawler fleet in Spain has the largest fuel consumption, and any actions taken here can reduce a large scale of fuel use, whereas on a fleet level, you would see that the pelagic fleet in the Netherlands has a great potential. And it's also important to acknowledge the fuel use per kilogram of catch, also the fuel use efficiency, which was not considered here. For the third scenario, that was entailed a full decarbonization. And here it's really, really essential that society also invest in green energy availability, and also the onshore infrastructure that is required to supply the vessels, innovations for some energy sources in terms of provide safety protocol, and also make sure that they are actually non-fossil. And here methanol appears to be one of the lowest hanging fruits. But both methanol and electricity for batteries today are also based on fossil fuels, unfortunately. So that's the green energy is really essential here. And when you look at the full decarbonization, overall, the really large vessel with a great fishing distance and distant waters, they will require quite substantial storage volumes. As indicated here, it's a huge difference if you look at the just average annual current fuel use per vessel based on EU data or per fishing day, and thinking that it should at least be twice the storage or more. So that will be a large call for change. But just a purely theoretical estimate, not because you need many more parameters to be able to estimate this. It appears like it's a small proportional change in gross tonnage. And here you can then use in these action plans for produced for these different fleets where overcapacity exists. Perhaps this could be used to exit some vessels and use this if there's need to support extra tonnage for these large vessels. So in the end, aligning then these action plans with decarbonization needs would be a powerful way forward. So take-home messages based on this very, very quick overview. It may be argued that the current capacity ceilings and especially the purpose behind them is not a hindrance for the energy transition. All the case studies fleets that we looked at, they showed biological imbalance, which then calls for that there are actions needed regardless to halt overcapacity and overfishing. And why not then align them with the decarbonization strategies? And overall, it cannot be enough repeated. Energy audits and monitoring of individual vessels are really key to understand because the operational profile, which alternative solutions that will be most useful, because we really will need tailored solutions of this very heterogeneous fleet. And we still need to focus on energy efficiencies, even though we turn into alternative fuels. And taking steps towards decarbonization, they can be taken today, both by fisheries and fishery management. At fishery management level, decreasing overcapacity, of course, but also the Article 17, where it's actually stated to promote energy efficient fisheries. So that is aligned with this. And for the individual fisher, there are a lot of different opportunities for energy efficiencies and hybrid solutions, of course, at different costs. So this brings another important topic here, that the current financial conditions really should be scrutinized, where tax exemptions on fossil fuels are still existing, and the alternatives are more costly compared to current use. And by this, I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sarah, for your insightful explanation of the findings from the report. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next speaker. Perhaps, Sarah, you can just take down, that's great. Next up, we've got Gorka Gabinia from ASTI, who is going to give us a technical exploration of the key challenges and opportunities in the energy transition. Gorka, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting us to give this presentation. And well, my name is Gorka Gabinia, and I work at ASTI, Marine and Food Research Institute in the north of Spain, Basque Country. So, well, there is a big storm here, so I hope we don't lose the connection, but well. Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, yeah, this is the specific context that I am, well, of course, I am going to present about energy transition, green energy transition, and some insights and experience that we developed and we did. And we do, but well, we have the specific context that the policies about the fleet decarbonization, that it is more focused in big ships, not in fisheries, in big ships. That well will do, but we try to achieve the climate neutrality by 2050. But our framework, that it is the common fisheries policy, with different standards in order to ensure the sustainability of the fishing sector as well as the biodiversity and well, environmental aspects. We have fishing fleet capacity, this standard that we take into account. Next slide, please. But well, for us, the the first thing that we have to know and we have to accept is that the fishing vessels and of course the fishing sector, the fishing fleet is very diverse, and there is a very variety of fishing operatives, fishing vessels dimensions, and fishing grounds, fishing gears. So there is no one fits all solution for all the vessels. So we need the tailored solutions in order to improve in energy efficiency and to start decarbonizing the sector. Next, please. And of course, as Sarah said, well, for us, it's essential to monitor the activity and to use instrumentation on board in order to improve our knowledge, how they operate, their energy demands, punctual demands, depending on the gear. Even one fishing vessel can operate with 2 fishing gears in different seasons. So for us, and of course, dimensions of the vessel and the availability of space in order to introduce and to sensors and instrumentation on board. So well, we do, and I think that it is important to monitor the activity and then to have numbers in order to design and find strategies, ad hoc strategies, effective strategies to reduce the fuel consumption, and maybe in advance to test them in test benches or even by means of pilot projects in vessels or in living labs, and then to generalize the implementation on board the vessels. Next, please. And well, tailored solutions. So well, we developed last year a work for the European Parliament that we published different solutions and different, divided in blocks. For example, the strategies that it is more related to the decision-making tools in order to reduce the fuel consumption by means of econometers or by means of energy consumption devices in order to know the numbers of consumption and, well, why not to reduce and slow steaming, for example, route optimization. Of course, fishing zone predictions, forecast to know where is the to guess where is the fish, and of course fishing tactics. We have to consider as well the fishing opportunities and ability to fish. That well, we have the limitations there, of course. And then more related to the vessel structure, to the equipment, machinery, and so on that we can improve in. Alternative energy sources, new fuels, to shift to another fuels that will, of course, require more space on board in order to storage the new fuels. Auxiliary machinery, wet heat recovery. There are some works that we have done in the past and we are now doing as well. And of course, the fishing gear, even if it is related to the towed fishing gears, that well, we need to reduce the resistance advance of the vessel, and well, we can of course shift to another gears or even develop new nettings, new materials, for example, new gears or even new otterboards, such as, for example, semi-pelagic otterboards, if it is okay for this fleet, for this vessel, and of course control the gear by means of instrumentation, by means of sensors, as to be as much as hydrodynamic possible. Next slide, please. And well, we have a case study here that it is well quite complete. We participate in one shift to alternative propulsion in one fishing vessel. It is not a professional fishing vessel, but it is a training fishing vessel for one fisheries school here in the Basque Country, in Pasaia, close to San Sebastian, close to Asti, Blas de Lezo, that well, we were participating in this project, and we retrofit the conventional diesel mechanic engine to an hybrid electric propulsion system with batteries. And well, the next step was the port facility for this solution. This is a living lab, of course, and it works. But it is a very good living lab in order to show to the fishing industry, to the fishing sector, this kind of solution. And well, we develop as well the port facility solution, that it is a smart grid, that we can manage it is a charge station, but it is a smart charge station that we can manage the directionality or the direction of the electricity, of the energy, that we can manage it from the vessel to the shore, from the shore to the vessel, because we have different renewable energy source plants in the roof of our building in Asti, and as well as in the charge station, and of course in the vessel. So well, it is a very good solution, and it is a demo, it is a living lab that it works now, and we can, for example, from the vessel, it is possible to send energy to the shore. Next slide, please. And well, some ongoing projects, European projects that we are participating with other mates, with other colleagues from other institutes, for example, RISE and LIFE, that they are panelists today. In the SIGLO project, that it is to facilitate the green transition for the smaller scale fisheries in the Baltic and North Sea, that, well, now we are implementing technology, we are implementing now instrumentation in order to know the fishing operational patterns of these vessels to design the good solutions. And well, some retrofits are expected to do regarding the propulsion system, and as well energy efficient solution like coat in the hull in order to reduce the resistant advance. And more projects, for example, in CINEA project, European Union's Fishing Fleet Evolution Challenge and Future, that it is led by DTU and MRAC, that we have one task that it is about the EU fishing fleet policy, and we are working with the fishing capacity for decarbonization and, of course, for social and safety aspects as well. And the Energy Transition Partnership Assistance Mechanism, that, well, we are coordinators of support group in research organization and academia category, that it is a bottom-up advisory consultative body that we will try to design a roadmap in order to facilitate the green transition for the fisheries and aquaculture, and well, to help the European Commission on that. And well, we have different thematic area that we are going to work by means of working groups with experts as well. And one of the topic is regulatory framework, that it is very linked to this topic today in this webinar. And well, I encourage you to participate in the next workshops this week, and you have the link there to register. So for small scale fisheries, large scale fishery, and distance water fisheries as well. And next slide, yeah, to finish, I think. Some highlights, some conclusions that, well, we think that the decarbonization solutions will be different per each case. As well, we need to monitor and to improve our knowledge in order to give solutions and effective solutions, so we can monitor the activity of the fishing vessels as well. And some of these solutions may require more space, more GTs, and more capacity. So, well, we have this sentence that this new fishing vessel may enter the fleet only after the same fleet capacity is removed. So, well, this is our limitation, but well, as we see before, maybe there is GTs available and destined for decarbonization and safety aspects as well. Well, for us, energy transition, this is a transition, so we think, and we thought, I believe, about different time periods. So in short term, we think that it is more feasible, for example, energy efficiency improvements that maybe not require more GTs, and in a longer term forecast, the solution of alternative fuels that maybe it is supposed, of course, that require more space for storage and of course specific storage conditions of temperature, pressures, and so on. So, well, I think that we need more in-depth research for this solution now. And the Energy Transition Partnership, that during the next year we will be discussing different topics. As one topic will be regulatory framework, that, of course, fishing capacity is going to be that we will discuss about it. Okay, so thank you so much. That's all from my side, and well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gorka, and I'm glad that the storm didn't interrupt us at all, and I hope that everyone is safe over there. Thanks to Sarah and Gorka, we've really gotten into the technical details of things, and so now we thought we would shift the tone a bit and talk to some of the people who are really affected most directly and work with those most directly affected by the developments that we're talking about. First, I'm pleased to introduce Daniel Boces from Europesh, who will share his organization's perspective. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invite. Can you hear me well? Perfect. I will put my screen. Okay, is it full screen now for everyone? Presentation. Perfect. So thank you very much, and I really appreciate the invite and the organization of this webinar. Today I will be presenting from a Europass perspective our views on the decarbonization and capacity ceilings. So I would like to start with the first message, and that is that the fishing industry is part of the solution to mitigate the impact of the climate change. And we say this because fishes, they provide one of the healthiest animal proteins with one of the smallest footprints when compared with other animal proteins. So that is why we say that fishing is a key strategic sector for our society. We have come a long way already by reducing substantially our energy consumption. And thanks to the many efforts, and I would say sacrifices of our fishermen, most of our landings come from sustainable sources, particularly in the Atlantic. Now, I would like also to give a little bit of context about our fisheries footprint. If we look at global emissions from the fishing industry, we see that we only account for 0.1 or 0.5% of the global emissions. So out of this tiny percentage, the European Union fishing emissions only represent 3% of the global fishing emissions. So in other words, we only contribute to global emissions 0.01%. Also, let's have a look at the trends in the last year. Emissions from the fishing industry in the European Union has been reduced by 52% since 1990. This is almost the target that we have in the European Green Deal, 7 years ahead of the deadline, which is 2030. And how this has been achieved? Well, first is fleet reduction. The second one is the good management of our fisheries. And the third one is the investments in new technologies. We see that it may be seen like this is an easy exercise, but if you compare this to other countries like Norway, you see that they actually increased the greenhouse emissions. So I think this is something we should be proud of in the European Union. Now, in the short term, we believe that it's more appropriate to talk about decarbonization and not energy transition. I will explain why, because nowadays our fishing vessel owners, they are investing in a mix of solutions to lower their emissions, like hybrid engines, complementary use of renewable technologies on board and ashore, improved gear design, improved vessel design, and circular economy schemes. The report that presented today refers to advanced carbon neutral fuels, suggesting that when combined with other technologies, we can reduce greenhouse emissions by almost 79%. And I fully agree with this. We can actually get to 100% with advanced carbon neutral fuels. And yes, they offer a great opportunity because they work with existing technologies and we don't need to increase the spaces on board. However, we need to bear in mind that this technology is still being developed. It's not commercially available and it's really expensive. So in addition to this, we also need the right infrastructure and the right supply in the different regions. So therefore, suggesting this as a way forward, yes, we fully agree, but we have to do it with extreme caution. So in the long term, we need to talk about this energy transition. So we need to look at different energy sources. However, as everybody knows, this requires more space on board. Hydrogen storage, for instance, required 4 times more space on board than the one that we have for fuel oil, and this is because it's less efficient. So the installation of these technologies far exceed the capacity ceilings that we have nowadays in the European Union, and they are available in each member state, even accounting for the unused gross tonnage. Because we are talking about vessels that are at least twice the size of the current vessels if we are going to use these different technologies. So the negative impact of these capacity restrictions is nothing new in the European Union. Social partners, so European and trade unions and COGECA and different European institutions, they have called on numerous occasions for the introduction of social tonnage. So this means that spaces on board for accommodation and leisure, they should not be counted as fishing capacity. They have nothing to do with the ability of the fishing vessel to catch the fish. So in this regard, fishing capacity restrictions, they are hindering the modernization of the fleet and they are hampering social and safety improvements. And I would like to remind you that it doesn't matter how big the vessel is if the operator has to comply with a quota. I know that this is not general for everyone or for all fisheries in Europe, but this is the case for many fisheries. So the problem that we see in many of the arguments that we see publicly available is that some organizations, they don't like big vessels, and that's the reason why. So the social problem, the social tonnage was really a problem that was recognized back in 2002 by the Common Fisheries Policy. And as you can see in Article 11, Paragraph 5, the Common Fisheries Policy allowed the exemption of these spaces from the capacity system. So they were not accounted as capacity under the previous system. So perhaps it's time to reconsider this approach and extend it to the energy transition. We also noticed that one of the main policy recommendations in the report is to switch fishing gears, and normally from active to passive fishing gears. So for us, it is important to regulate based on science and not prejudice. And for that reason, we need to analyze and balance the trade-offs between greenhouse emissions and landings. On paper and perhaps aggregated data, we can see that active gears might seem to produce more emissions than other gears, but it's not always the case. Have a look, for instance, at pots and traps in the slide. In fact, according to the Commission's data, active gears can be even more efficient than other gears, as shown in the slide. And these are figures on European figures and on average. So it really depends on the country, on the métier, and the fishery. So we cannot generalize, and I can tell you from experience that fishers, they are not silly, and they choose the right tool for each fishery. So to conclude, the energy transition will be challenging not only from a technological and legislative point of view, but also from a financial point of view. New technologies are very expensive, and we estimate that the cost of the transition for vessels above 12 meters would require between 22 and 36 billions of euros. And furthermore, the average age of the European fishing fleet is 33 years. It's not 31, it's 33 years. So simply changing the engine is not going to work. So as a result, it is essential to put in place a European fleet renewal plan. However, public funding in the EU is extremely limited in money and in scope. It is forbidden to support the construction of new vessels, and the MFAF is being recently cut by the European Union, as you can see in the slide. Finally, we believe that until new propulsion technologies are commercially available, the European Union should not introduce taxes on fuel for fishing vessels. The opposite would only penalize the sector, since there's no real alternatives for our operators. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and rest assured that Europesh will be an ally in the transition towards zero emissions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Those were very helpful, insightful thoughts, and a big thanks to all three of our first speakers who have left more than enough time for our final speaker, who I'm very happy to introduce, Brian O'Riordan from the Low Impact Fishers of Europe. Brian, the floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me very clearly. Thanks very much for the invitation to be here, and thanks very much and congratulations to ClientEarth on picking these two very important issues that the EU fishing sector is having to grapple with. The questions you raise are about whether capacity ceilings are a barrier or an opportunity when it comes to decarbonisation. And I would like to say that they should be neither, because both of these issues are central to the direction of travel of the European fishing fleet. And as such, they need to be considered separately, which is what I would like to do here. But first of all, perhaps a little bit about me. I'm Brian O'Riordan. I'm the policy advisor at the Low Impact Fisheries of Europe, otherwise known as the LIFE platform. Our association was launched on the eve of the 2014 Common Fishing Policy. to represent or to provide a voice for the under 12-meter passive gear sector, which represents something like 70% of the vessel fleet, but only catches 6% of the catch. But the other side provides 40 to 50% of the employment in fishing and adds considerable value to the catch. So what we're talking about when we talk about small-scale fishing is day fishing operations, bringing back fresh fish, high-quality product, often a one or two-person operation, generally a micro or nano enterprise with a very small turnover of business, and a catch that can be measured in kilograms rather than tons per day, occasionally tons per day. So looking at these two issues, I think, first of all, it's helpful to look at what we're trying to do with the common fishing policy. First of all, is to provide environmental sustainability, which is achieving and maintaining healthy, resilient, and abundant fish stocks for current and future generations. And that is both an objective which capacity ceilings and decarbonisation are about. Just to flag that with capacity ceilings, we have a problem with measuring fishing capacity, which is picked up by the control regulation, which highlights the fact that neither gross tonnage nor engine power are very useful measurements. Much better measurement would be to measure the power supplied by the engine on a continuous basis. And then we have a study from 2019, which highlights that in over 51% of the cases in a study across 16 EU member states, 51% of the verifications found that engine power exceeded the certified engine power, and that the verification systems were not fit for purpose. So yes, it's all very well to talk about capacity, but really we need to look at the whole issue of how you balance fishing capacity with the available resources. And in doing that, I think we have a problem with fishery science, where our MSY levels are set too high. That really the best way to achieve energy efficiency is to have more fish in the sea. Fish less, fish better, have more fish in the sea, and a higher catch per unit effort. So what we see with our use of the maximum sustainable yield is the reference points we use mean that there is far less fish in the sea than there would be, say, if we used the American system or if we used the Australian system. In the EU, MSY means quotas that leave the biomass of fish around what's called the B trigger levels. B trigger is the highest EU biomass threshold, but is far below the historic levels of the stocks and much lower than in the USA, where MSY management takes into account multi-species, and Australia uses a maximum economic yield, which has a much lower fishing mortality level, resulting in higher biomass. So more fish in the sea, less need for so much energy. When we come to look at the solutions currently on the table for decarbonisation, as pointed out by Daniel Volchis, there are very few off-the-shelf solutions available, and particularly off-the-shelf solutions which are cheaper to invest in and less expensive to use. So one of the issues raised in the report was that running costs will now be replaced by capital costs. And I'm not sure really what that means, because the running costs of the new technologies are not going to be any less than the current running costs using fossil fuels. And if we got to increase capital costs, as Daniel pointed out, then the money available to invest in a new vessel fleet, where the current MFAF is simply not sufficient to provide any kind of meaningful investment, then we need to think again. Looking at the small-scale fleet, we have to think, well, where will the new technology be placed? If we're talking about batteries, which are large, heavy items, if they're to be placed on deck, then anything above the waterline will seriously affect the stability of the vessel, and anything placed below the waterline will have issues for storage space. If we're talking of introducing sail, the sail takes up more space on deck. So measuring fishing capacity by gross tonnage, I would say, is not a useful measure. Rather, we need to look at how the space aboard a vessel can be used adequately to ensure this process of decarbonisation. Looking at some of the figures provided in the various presentations, and coming back to the reports from the Scientific, Technical and Economic Committee on Fisheries, it's notable that if you look at small-scale and large-scale fleets, you have some very different kinds of indicators. In the case of the small-scale fleet, you see that the vessels are spending roughly 38 euros per day on fuel. A large-scale vessel is spending 689 euros per day on fuel. But given the different kinds of catches, then obviously for the larger scale sector, that translates into a better energy efficiency if you look at it just in terms of the fish produced. But if you look at terms of the jobs created and the value added, the 38 euro per day is quite important. If you look at the fuel prices, you'll see that the small-scale fleet on average pays roughly over €1, 1.07 euros per litre, whereas the larger scale fleet sector pays just under €1 per litre. So there's a difference in price. And when you look at the figures that Daniel Vocis showed, I think it's slide 9 or 10, there are some figures of different gear, and you'll notice that there is a huge variance, although the average may be interesting. If you look at the variance between the lower end and the higher end of the fuel efficiency, there are huge variations. And I wonder whether this is because the figures don't actually present smaller scale and larger scale fleet performance, but rather lump all together. So when you look at passive gears, then I would argue that it's important that you adopt a differentiated approach, because you're dealing with two very different production systems. the larger scale is producing a large volume of fish for large retail outlets, whereas the smaller scale sector is producing socioeconomic benefits for isolated communities, often isolated communities in remote areas, which don't often have access to other opportunities. So with that, I think my time's up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Brian. And that brings us to the question and answer session of the talk. We've got around 10 minutes, and I'm very grateful to all 4 of our participants for being here and being available to answer questions. We have a few questions that have been put into the Q&A section, and so I'm going to read the first one out, which I believe is probably for Brian and Danielle. The question is, do you think that the next MFAF, and that's the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund. So do you think the next MFAF should integrate specific measures to support the decarbonization of the fisheries sector while ensuring that funds are not used to increase fishing effort or overcapacity? And I see Daniel's already put his camera back on, so maybe Daniel, I'll refer to you first if you're happy to answer this one.
Yes, thank you for the question, and I think I fully agree with the question. So yes, the future funds need to include certain provisions to support the decarbonization of the fleets, and we're talking about all fleets and all fleet segments with all the specificities. The problem that we see, as I mentioned this already, is that the fund is being cut by 105 million for the next 2 years. So first, we need to continue having a fund specific for fisheries, and second, to support the decarbonization. Obviously, we have all sort of criteria and provisions that only eligible funding request can get funding. Not everything can be financed, and we need to respect certain conditions. So obviously, this is important to keep for the future funds. Well, we have now the WTO discussions on fish subsidies that do not create overcapacity and overfishing. And I'm sure that the European system is already in line with what is being negotiated at the international level. So I think we have all the necessary provisions to make sure that the funding is well used and is not going to generate these issues. And we need to change certain provisions because nowadays, as I mentioned in this during the intervention, we cannot support any construction of new vessels, and perhaps we should reconsider this approach. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not receiving any signals from you.
No, sorry,
so
sorry, Brian. My computer wouldn't let me unmute, so I was trying to signal to you by hand. But please go for it.
Okay, thanks very much. Of course, in an ideal world, there should be lots of money, and we should be able to renew the fleet in a way which meets the decarbonization and the whole issue of fleet capacity. But the problem is we're not sure what the new MFAF will look like. Already it's MFAF, which means aquaculture. So there will be provisions there for aquaculture, but we also know that part of the new commissioner's brief is to produce a pact for the oceans. So what role will the blue economy play? Already we know that the space on the fishing grounds is being eaten into by offshore energy production. And we also know that there is a discussion going on about food security and the role of fisheries. But the fact is that the European consumer is rejecting fish that is being caught by European fleets, where we see 70% of the fish that we consume imported. And the main fish consumed, canned tuna, Alaska pollock, and salmon from aquaculture, are not fish that Europe produces in great abundance. So the question is how will our food security plan be coherent with our fishery improvement plan, which will be towards keeping within capacity ceilings, having a modern fleet which provides good jobs, earns a good economic return, is competitive in the world. So I think there are some pre-questions to the two questions posed that we really need to look hard at what role fishing will play in the coastal economy in the future, what role it will play in our food from the sea in the future, and how we can continue to ensure that fishing is a vibrant and sustainable industry within Europe.
Thanks so much, Brian. Thank you to both of you for that. I'm going to ask another question that I think any of our panelists could answer, but I will turn to Sarah and Gorka first to give them the chance to address it. The question is, at the moment, the EU fisheries sector does not have a binding target for achieving the binding climate objectives that the EU has. Do you think it could be helpful for the future of the European fisheries sector to accelerate the transition if we had such a target? Sarah, I'll turn to you first.
Thank you. Well, I think it would help if there would be a clear direction in some way with some intermediate targets on action plan on how to achieve this, because of course it will cost and it will be very a need for tailor-made solutions for different fleets and different strategies. And it's also the part with fishery management that really need to ensure that stocks are targeted sustainably, both in terms of overcapacity and overfishing. So I think it would help at least with a clear action plan. And then in that, developing that, I guess, binding targets would always perhaps be a good idea, yes.
Thank you, Sarah. And Gorka, if you have any thoughts.
Yes, adding in addition to Sarah's comments, well, I just to tell you about the energy transition partnership that maybe we are going to design a roadmap to do that for the European Commission about the fisheries and aquaculture sector in order to facilitate the green transition. So, well, we will be discussing about different topics, and it is a bottom-up consultory body. So, well, we are going to talk about the insights, of course, ambition goals, funding aspects, social aspects as well, skills that is very relevant in this one, and regulatory framework. So, well, we will be during the 2025, there will be opportunities as well for you to participate in these panels. For example, this workshop this week, that it is going to be about the small scale, large scale, and long distance water fleets, that we will be design and build this roadmap that we think is needed in order to facilitate the decarbonization of the fleet. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Gorka. And I see, Daniel, you've got your hand up, so I'm happy to hand it over to you for this one as well.
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's a very good question, and I think the target has been set by the European Union to reduce by 90% our emissions by 2040, and I think this is really important. But we need to acknowledge that as fishing industry, we are the civil society. We are, in other words, consumers of technology. So imposing the target on the fishing industry, I think is rather challenging. I mean, we as whenever you're going to buy a new car, you very much depend on the available cars that are in the market, and then you can decide which one you need for your personal needs. And I think this is very much what is happening in fisheries. We very much depend on the technology that is provided to us. So in any case, as mentioned by Sarah, we would need some guidance from the Commission to go there to achieve these goals, and which options do we have out of a menu. But setting binding targets without already having the means to get there, I think I'm not sure if it's really productive for us. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you so much, Danielle. And Brian, I'll give you the last word on this one.
Thanks very much. I mean, there's a whole seminar to be had on this question. It's a very, very good question. But suffice it to say that decarbonisation is all about addressing the climate change crisis. that we face. And when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions, the fishing sector's contribution to climate change is absolutely a drop in the ocean. Really, what we need to do is have a policy towards delinking our energy requirements from fossil fuels. We really have to diminish our use of fossil fuels, because this is one of the key Achilles heels of the fishing sector. To be economically viable, you can't be dependent on fossil fuel. And I think that is the way to go forward. We have to look at it from an economic point of view, not just from a greenhouse gas emission point of view. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. I know that there are some unanswered questions in the Q&A section, but I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, as we've already gone a bit above time, and my colleagues and I will take note of these questions to see how we can go about answering them. I also know that someone asked for the presentations. We will check with the panelists to see if we can distribute them, but of course this session has been recorded as well, so they're available by watching the recording. So I'd like to close just by thanking you all for joining us today and contributing to such an engaging and thought-provoking discussion. The discussion has shed light on the complex interplay between capacity ceilings and the fishery sector's path towards decarbonization. We've heard a variety of perspectives, from scientific insights and policy implications to the real-world challenges faced by stakeholders in the industry. As we move forward, the insights shared today will play a vital role in shaping the ongoing dialogue on decarbonizing EU fisheries. We encourage all of you to stay connected, share ideas, and continue advocating for a sustainable and resilient fisheries sector. On behalf of ClientEarth, I would like to thank our speakers for their valuable contributions and our audience for your active participation. Together, we are taking meaningful steps toward ensuring a sustainable and climate-neutral future for fisheries. Thank you so much, and have a great day.